Georgia House Speaker Glenn Richardson wants to eliminate all of your property taxes, taxes on your home, your car, boat, business, and replace them with a sales tax. However, Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle favors lowering or abolishing the state income tax, while Governor Perdue wants a tax break for seniors. So which plan is best? It really depends on who you ask. Here to help sort it out, Alan Essig, Executive Director of the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, and Kelly McCutchen, Senior Vice President of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. Thank you both for being here. I appreciate it. This has gotten a lot of ink, a lot of attention. I know that you're currently touring the state. The House Speaker and other Republicans are currently touring the state, trying to put things in place before the 2008 session. But let's start with the Speaker's plan. No state in this country has ever wiped out property taxes. We would be establishing the model. What makes him or experts believe that it would work?
From the Speaker's perspective, it's very politically popular. It polls well. The most unpopular tax we have is the property tax. Most people would like that at least than anything else. Mm-hmm. So I think from his perspective, he thinks the public would like it, and I think that's a lot of what's driving it.
There's always a little sticker shock. Property values increase, and it is based on an assessment. So some people think, there's some human error possibly in there. Why do you think the Speaker thinks this is the way to go?
Well, first of all, you've got to realize the background. The state is being sued by several school districts because they think that our property tax funded system of education funding is unconstitutional and inequitable. So it's likely that the state's going to be centralizing some of the funding of education anyway. And clearly, as Alan said, the property tax, not only is it unpopular, people have the perception, I think our assessors do a pretty good job across the board, but still there's that impression and perception that it's unfair how they assess property. It's a regressive tax. It is a tax that really hurts small businesses. If you're just starting your small business and you're not making much money, you're not paying much income tax. If you're not selling much, you're not paying sales tax, but you still have to pay those property taxes.
Look at the services that would be taxed, because it would really broaden the service tax base. So what services are we looking at?
Georgia taxes one of the least amount of services of any state in the country. So you're talking about things like hairdressers, landscape artists, according to the Speaker's proposal, possibly doctors, lawyers, accountants, the wide gamut. Part of the problem of the proposal is right now there's nothing written down. It's more of a theory and a concept that the speech is talking about in speeches around the state.
And we should point out that H.R. 900, this bill, which is actually posted online, it doesn't really resemble any longer what is being discussed. And so I think there's some confusion about that.
Right.
And you say there's nothing written down. There's something written, but it's not accurately reflecting
and the Speaker
status.
himself has said that the bill that dropped is no longer relevant to the discussion. So the question is, I think the Speaker is on the right track of the state needs to expand the base to cover services because the way the economy is driving. It's a question of what services make sense to tax. Do you tax all of them, or do you look at it thoughtfully, strategically, figure out which ones make economic sense, which ones make tax policy sense, and just go after those? Right now, according to my perception of the Speaker's proposal, is we're talking about all services, and we really need to be very thoughtful about what we take on and what we leave.
There's roughly $9 to $10 billion that we would have to make up if this. Some say 8, some say 8.5. You say it could be closer to $10 billion that we would have to make up. So when we look at these services, everyone at this point is kind of agreeing that our services all need to be evaluated because we have exemptions. Some of those exemptions should remain.
That's right.
Correct. But others need to be evaluated.
It's about $8.5 billion that need to replace the property tax if you offset some of the things that the Speaker's not going to replace, such as the bonds that are still going to be in place. Georgia State has done a study that says we got rid of all of our exemptions to the sales tax, it would bring in approximately $10 billion in additional revenue, and they didn't include professional services.
Okay, but of the $10 billion, roughly half should stay. You both agree, correct? There's two that you think there's two exemptions that need to stay.
The two biggest exemptions was government-to-government sales and raw materials for manufacturing. And those two exemptions alone total $5 billion of the $10 billion.
Okay.
And then if you include health care and some of the other exemptions in there, and there's probably another $1, $2, $3 billion that will probably end up staying also. There's probably over 100 exemptions in the code. Most of them, the dollar value of the exemptions are extremely small. Okay. There's a very few exemptions that are most of the money, and we need to be, again, really thoughtful about what we get rid of and what we stick with. Again, looking at the exemptions is smart. We should have been doing it years ago. Some of them put in for policy reasons that may be irrelevant now, but we need to be very thoughtful about what we get rid of. And since the property tax is totally linked to getting rid of the exemptions, we have to make sure the math works.
Okay. If I can narrow this down, kind of backtracking slightly, there's about $1 to $2 billion of exemptions in play. Is that right?
Well, that's in my opinion.
In your opinion, do you agree?
I think it's a little larger than that because you're not counting professional services at all in this.
When you say you mean
lawyers,
legal services, accountants,
That's
and
right.
if healthcare is included. Now, if healthcare is included, is the Speaker prepared to give tax credits to the poor?
Yes, what he has said on both food and health care, he would provide a tax credit for low-income Georgians to offset the regressivity of taxing those services. I think the other thing we sort of glossed over, it's important to minimize taxes on business transactions because you end up pyramiding taxes, tax on a tax on a tax.
I see you shaking your head. You both agree.
That's right.
Don't want the
100%.
pyramid.
You want consumer purchases is what you want to tax, both goods and services, as broad a base as possible, with also making sure that you take care to make it fair, and you look at things like food and health care for low-income Georgians.
Okay. Right now, some of what's being bantered about is this is simply a shift of the wealthy to the poor. And you're saying that the Speaker's prepared to offset that. Do you think the Speaker will deliver on those promises?
Well, one of the issues is at what level does he offset that? And whatever dollar amount we end up giving back in a credit for folks for food or for medication is that much more we have to raise from the tax system in another way. Okay. So again, it's really important that the math works on this because this is a constitutional amendment that that they're proposing, which means that it's very difficult to change once it's in place. So we need to really understand the unintended consequences before it happens. Because if 2 or 3 years from now we're short $1 billion, $1.5 billion, it's extremely difficult to go back. So it's nothing that should be rushed through. We need to be really thoughtful about what the numbers are and have a really good sense of what the right policy is.
What about local control? There's a lot of associations, such as the Georgia Municipal Association, I know that is working with you, touring the state, that is extremely concerned they're going to lose local control. Because if I understand the proposal correctly, the money will all be collected and then doled back out to local governments based on a formula. Am I wrong?
That's a misperception.
Okay, explain.
My understanding, of course, things are not solid yet.
Okay.
But what the Speaker has said, and I've heard him say this directly on several occasions, is you need about $8.5 billion. $3.5 billion approximately is going to come from expanding the local sales tax base. So those are local sales taxes that are already in place that
will remain in place.
That's right. They're going to say the rate is going to be the same, but because you're taxing more services, cities, school systems, and counties are all going to be getting more money. The Speaker says they should be allowed to spend that extra money however they want to. Typically, sales taxes are prohibited from being spent on operations, just on capital. He would give the cities and local governments more flexibility. So they have 100% control of nearly half of the extra money. The other half is going to be coming at the state level on the state's 4% sales tax, which is already existing. The Speaker has a plan that he has appointed Representative Larry O'Neill, head of the Ways and Means Committee, to put together a joint Senate and House committee to review the way to get those monies back to the local governments. But what he has said is it's going to be a block grant, no strings attached, which is very different than, say, for instance, the billions of dollars the state sends to schools under QBE education funding formula, which has lots of strings attached.
Of course. Okay. Your thought. You want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, there's a real problem with formula funding, with counties, local governments, and so forth. It's not a question of them not having the freedom to spend the money as they see fit once they get it. The problem is in the future. I mean, the formula may be relevant today, may be relevant 2 years from now, but some local community wants to invest money in an infrastructure, an economic development project, an education. If it goes beyond what the formula says they get, they won't have the option to do it themselves because they no longer have the taxing authority through the property tax to raise the funds.
They would have to go back up through the legislature.
Yeah, that's, again, part of it is it's hard to have a firm understanding of what this is because there's nothing.
It's fluid.
It's very fluid. So, and Kelly may have more information than I do. It's very likely, but it's one of the big issues. We really have to have a firm understanding of what we're doing before we do it.
All right, and Kelly, what you're basically saying is, it is being addressed in this process.
That's right. And I think Representative O'Neill is going to be looking at that. He understands tax issues very well. And absolutely, I don't know many Georgia Democrats or Republicans would support a plan that doesn't give that flexibility and local control to local governments. Under this plan, the state is going to making sure that they're going to set a formula to provide those core government services. We don't want to encourage increased spending at the local level. That's something we would be concerned about. But they're going to have the ability to raise their local sales taxes if they want to fund. We're not raising the rate. If they want to raise the rate and fund new services,
we're not raising the rate.
Fine.
It's still 4%.
That's right. So they will have a source of revenue.
All right, let's look quickly. Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle says, okay, rather than touch the property taxes, why don't we consider lowering or abolishing the state income tax? 7 other states have done it. However, you would argue that all those other states that have done that have something else to make up the funding. For instance, Florida has tourism. Texas has oil.
Most of the states have another revenue source.
Okay.
The 2 states probably most relevant to Georgia would be Tennessee and Washington State. And those 2 states have some of the most unstable budget and revenue situations of any state in the country. It's a question of, it's the similar reasons that it's not good to get rid of the property tax, the entire income tax, is you want to have a stable and balanced system. The 3 legs of the system, which most states have, tend to be the systems that are more stable economically, that help states get through recessions. There's a real question whether it makes sense to eliminate an entire tax. There are problems within each individual tax. And I think the bottom line question for the General Assembly and the governor is, do we blow up the system? Is the system so fundamentally flawed, or do we fix the system? And there are things within each of the taxes to make it more relevant, to improve it, to make it more relevant to the 21st century, and to move Georgia forward. Or do we just eliminate an entire tax and take a huge gamble? Again, that's very difficult to go back from once you do.
Everybody wants stability. Everybody. And the argument by many is the sales tax is unstable.
The way to get to stability, the reason we have instability in the sales tax is because we're not taxing services and because we took the tax off of food. When you tax and broaden the base, then it becomes more stable. And
everything levels out again. Let's look
right.
quickly at the governor's plan. He has pushed this. It did not go through. His plan to give a tax break to seniors. Some say don't offer a special tax to a segment of the population. And some say that it's really not going to be the economic stimuli that the governor says it's going to be.
Well, we're already very generous to seniors in Georgia. And I think we do have to be careful. This is the baby boom generation. They're not all, as we would typically think, elderly individuals who don't have a lot of resources. Some may and some may not. I think you'd be very careful in the tax code when you're targeting tax cuts. We would prefer to see a much broader based tax reduction. Not saying we would be adamantly against the governor's proposal, but we would prefer to see broader based tax relief.
I agree with Kelly. I think that the governor's proposal is flawed on a couple levels. One is the demographics of it. About 10% of the population is over 65 today. That's expected to almost double in the next 20 years. So what you're basically doing is exempting almost 20% of the population from the tax base. And with
as far as your dangerous precedent.
And that shifts it to everyone else. And the other is a fairness issue. Why should a senior making a couple over 65 making $125,000 a year pay no income taxes, and a family of 4 making $30,000 a year having to pay? So on several levels, I think it's a very problematic proposal. The ideal tax system is a broader base as possible and as low a rate as possible. And the more special exemptions you have in, the harder it is to have that low rate.
All right, last question. What goes through in the 08 session? All of it? Part of it? And if part of it, which part?
I think the best chance, the challenge is the revenue going to be there? If you minimize business taxes, are you going to have enough revenue? Worst case scenario, I think you eliminate half of all property taxes in the state and shift the funding of education primarily to the sales tax base, and then maybe you go back later and look at cities and counties. But I think that has a somewhat of a chance because of the lawsuit we're under and because we're already looking to centralize education funding.
All right, Alan, last one.
I think it'll be somewhat difficult to get something through unless someone's philosophy changes. I mean, the Senate and the governor tend to be talking about the income tax. The House Speaker tends to be talking about the property tax. There's not a real good compromise between both of them unless you get rid of both of them, which I don't think is on the table.
Well, we just have a few months, and at the way things are going, as you pointed out, they're not all gelling right now. So it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. I appreciate your time, Kelly McCutchen and Alan Essig. Thanks for being here.